a lovely special occasion as over the weekend, and this will be probably the main talking point of the show. We'll see if we just get into it now and see where it leads. Who knows? Maybe we will. But over the weekend, probably the biggest talking point within our scene was the reception to the NHL's Gaming World Championship, the GWC, and given all of our experience within the esports scene, Endo included, you popped up into my chat when I was streaming on Saturday night, and you're just like, I have so many thoughts, but I don't know where to air them. And I'm like, I know the perfect place, because I know Sin and I have plenty of thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those cases of I'll compare it to our fears about the Ovechkin, right? Is he going to gradually decline, or will there just be a steep fall off? And it seems when it's come to the NHL esports scene, all of a sudden it was just this steep fall off. And this is the GWC, which is supposedly has been the largest showcase essentially of NHL esports scene, and the venue that they had it at, just I completely forgot it was happening. Mm-hmm. Another thing, lack of promotion. It was just an epic fail in every single way.
Yeah, so for those that missed it, the GWC North American side of the tournament, because they still have the World Final portion, the NA versus EU thing, took place this weekend from the NHL store in New York City, leading to some images where they were essentially just set up in a corner of this store. Optics are a big thing, very big thing in a situation like this, and I don't know if they could have picked a worse location, but they would have had to try. Setting up a table in the middle of your shop is pretty low compared to what we've seen really across the board in the NHL esports side of things. When the GWC first started, it was 2018?
Yes,
2018 if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so.
Heavy investment in that first tournament. The hype around it was awesome. I was on Twitch already at that point. The hype around that tournament was great. You had memorable moments as well from the early days of the GWC. I hate to say it, Nuge, but he is involved in the most memorable moments.
Yes.
I still say just kidding to him as often as I can, especially when we play FC Pro clubs.
He's a factor of memeable content. For a guy that, the soundboard stuff that we have him on, he's a very memeable dude at times. But yeah, oh dude, that is still one of the funniest moments in esports. And shout out to the other guy who doesn't even, I think Grizz. Wait.
Grizz.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Also
not Grizz Goal, but he doesn't even play NHL anymore.
Yeah.
Graz did go. It is Graz.
Graz, that's what it was.
He went into, I don't even think he does that anymore, but he did go into kind of the F1 esports scene.
Yeah, I saw
that type of league there, and was very, very good there as well. So, which is interesting because he was probably one of the first to have kind of success in the early days of the GWC, only to then just be like, this really isn't a long-term thing to focus on. And I think in the subsequent 5 years or so, especially this year, we have seen a lot of people take a step back. particularly from our experiences with Sports Gamer, just within a calendar year of February 2023 to February 2024, we saw a heavy exodus of talents from the scene on both sides, both North American, including the dissolution of Entourage, who won the Sports Gamer World Final in February of 2023. We have seen drastic changes to teams and organizations, representation that has gone away, players that have gone away and said that it's not really worth it anymore. And that's kind of the discussion I think that we wanted to have, was how did we go from the heights of pre-pandemic NHL Esports,
even during pandemic, I would say it peaked at that point because like the foundation was there, some of that money was still rolling in, and people, real sports kind of got shut down for a while, so everyone kind of turned to esports for a little bit. But because of all that, and like companies being having to be more financially stringent, so to speak, like then it started to fall off when that money began to dry up due to the pandemic. So it was kind of a good and a bad. Like viewership peaked around that time, hype level peaked, but then the money disappeared after that. So yeah, it really declined after the pandemic kind of hit.
I can't disagree with that, right? And I did go back and look. So with the GWC, there was the 2018 tournament and the 3 different regional finals that they had. They had a Canadian regional, US regional, European regional, and it led to the final kind of 6 that they had there, held in Las Vegas for $50K. And like we mentioned, the hype level surrounding this particular tournament was up there. Like I remember solid viewership for not only the finals, the regionals as well, and just the build up to what felt like the scene finally getting the momentum that a lot of people saw. In 2018, you had already had LG around for over a decade doing what they do. Sports Gamer had already been around for years as well on the European side of things. And you just started to think, okay, here's this momentum. Where's this going to go? And really through the GWC is where you started to see that elevation take place. You started to see more NHL teams hosting these tournaments and getting involved, which we do still see today. The Sharks, Caps, the Isles are still very much involved in the scene. But in that time, we've seen the Montreal Canadiens representation fall off over the last couple of years. We've seen the Tampa Bay Lightning representation fall off. And like I said, it's all kind of wrapped up into one in terms of like, okay, how did we go from that hype level to this? To where orgs have dropped out, players are retiring from the game, in air quotes. And the GWC isn't being played at a big esports arena in Las Vegas. It's being played next to merchandise in a store. I don't even know how to approach, like, how did we get here? I guess the best place to start would be for you guys. Where do you feel like for you, in terms of the peak of the esports scene, what kind of timestamp would you put on that? Like, where did you feel we were like, oh, okay, this scene's finally taking off and going places?
I would probably say 2019 up until early 2022 is probably around that prime point. And I start with 2019 just because I think that was the second year with NHL GWC where people saw that first one and the success behind it. And you started to see people say, okay, this could actually work, I think, on the one side, at a bigger stage, in a grander scale. And that's also where we start to finally see NHL organizations on the Sixers side of things really start to invest. That's when we saw the Capitals come in around 2019. We saw the Isles come in, the Sharks come in around 2020, 2021. And I feel like at that time, it felt like NHL esports, especially as you mentioned earlier, Sid, with the pandemic coming in, teams and organizations were starting to invest in it and they were starting to see returns on that. And I think that the community definitely benefited from there not being actual things going on in the world. People were stuck at home playing the game, so they wanted to participate themselves or see the best of the best play the game themselves. But I just feel like since that late 2021, early 2022 period, we have seen less of a presence from a lot of these organizations. We've even seen on the EU side, organizations drop out completely, like the SHL, which used to have a very big presence. That was one of the bigger tournaments you would find on the Sixers side in Europe. They aren't doing anything really now. We've seen a lot of organizations on the Swedish side and the Finnish side of things drop out of representing teams. And it just feels like since that 2022 point up to where we are now, there's just been a slow but steady decline. And this whole thing that's happened in the last, not even just this past weekend, but I think really NHL 24, it feels like where we've really hit rock bottom, to where you have a lot of notable players, a lot of notable organizations pretty much distancing themselves from the community. And I think that it really did kind of start around that early 2022 point, and it's gotten progressively worse, it feels like, since then.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because personally for me, like in my experience as a caster, like I felt like I began to peak in 2022 because that was the first time we were able to do a live finals. Yeah. And that's when I was getting really excited. But yeah, I would tend to agree. I would say, like, for me, definitely, like, leading up to and then during the pandemic, at least like the lockdown portions and maybe a little bit after that too, was really when I think we saw the height of viewership, involvement, and honestly just overall like chatter and hype around it. And it's crazy how quickly it's fallen off. And for me, it ties into the game product as well. Like if it's being played on that medium, there's, that's always going to have a part of it. Tougie and I were very excited for the new direction that the franchise seemed to be taking. With that, it's going to create some controversy. Some of the players and teams who had success in previous titles, especially if it's too different, they're going to probably not like it on principle because, like, well, they're not going to be able to do what they used to do to find all that success. And that starts digging into their pocket and things like that. But it also went beyond that, where a lot of things we were promised weren't ever delivered on. And, certain things were late. Various adjustments were, continuing to be made to get it to a point of where, okay, well, now it's very similar to a previous title, but you've kind of burned the bridge already. And so the people that you lost aren't really going to come back. And so, yeah, it's a tough situation. And I think sports game esports really face that dilemma of, if the game changes too much from year to year, the esports will suffer. If it doesn't change enough from year to year, then your kind of baseline suffers, like, of the product itself. And I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds on this discussion, but I think that all ties into the esports side of things and how that's going to be affected. And I think it's very clear with Entourage falling off and then, their top players trying to play with another team and then just being like, no, I don't like the game right now, I'll retire. What they should really said is, I'm just going to take the rest of the year off. We'll, check back in next year. But yeah, we've really kind of felt it. When especially, like, I mean, everyone's felt it, but casters especially, I think when you start noticing, like, either work starting to dry up when it seemed abundant at what point and you can pick and choose what you wanted, or pay beginning to dry up. And both of those things have sort of happened on the production and caster side of things. And there's some really good talent either moving on or just stepping back.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of it, right? Like, it's not a simple answer as to, okay, the state of NHL esports, how did it go from on the rise to easily having its, I would argue its worst representation But that's only because, like, okay, so in the days of like NHL 15, NHL 16, the esports team was basically non-existent at that stage. I mean, it was outside of like an LG or something like that. But you know, I guess some people would still argue it's like, hey, there are still these tournaments where people can make money, and something is better than nothing.
Remember Gamer Saloon?
Well, it's funny because, you know, at the end of the day, like, it is still nice that, like, the GWC, for example, exists.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's nice that it hasn't completely gone away, even if the experience or prestige behind it has completely fallen off. Like, at the end of the day, it is still a money-making opportunity for the, you know, the super high-end talent within the game. But like I said, there's so many different layers to this. And I think back to when I saw that picture, my initial response was, it's three things that have kind of caused the bit of a fall off at this point. And those three things that I had labeled were the pandemic, for as positive as it was, I feel like it created a bubble. I feel like it created unrealistic expectations of those on the outside who all of a sudden were looking into the scene and saying, oh, here's the potential and it can only grow from here, as opposed to looking at it and saying, no, that's the high end. Because you don't have anything else to do, because people are at home, that is the level at its best at that point in time that with proper care you could grow into. Instead, I think, whether it be certainly the NHL themselves, whether it be certain NHL teams, outside organizations, I think all of that is factored in to, again, they're just being that, I can only use the term bubble, where I just think they saw it as a scene that was already complete instead of a scene that was on the rise and needed that extra foundation to be built to make it sustainable long term. Another aspect to that pandemic, for me, is the community itself. Every thing, every interest, every hobby, you will have toxic people involved. That is just a fact, because toxic people are everywhere. Who you define as toxic, that's up to you. Some people define me as toxic, and that's perfectly fine. But I can only think back to the experience that I had and that I saw firsthand during the pandemic. We talked about certain organizations being scared away. In 2020, that was 2020. There was an event put on in conjunction with the gaming esports org Northern Arena.
Yeah.
A huge opportunity for NHL Esports to be associated with Northern Arena and what that could potentially represent, especially for the future of the growth in NHL Esports within Canada. Unfortunately, right around that time of the tournament, we're talking about, what was it? June of 2020? And something happened in late May, early June of 2020. And it's kind of crazy to think about, but genuinely this was a factor. The George Floyd murder had a huge impact on NHL Esports. And I know that statement in and of itself is kind of like, what the hell are you even talking about?
Yeah, but wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more. So this tournament when a lot of protests were going on, the decision was made to postpone games for one night. And the fucking backlash that Northern Arena faced from a good portion of people complaining about their games being delayed, I think left a long-lasting negative mark on the community. I think that made the worst impression it could have possibly made. And when you're talking about the esports scene, if it's not the top of the top, fucking your Counter-Strikes, your League of Legends, whatever the fuck, when you're talking like within the NHL Esports scene circle, to make that much of a negative impression, that's going to circle around. That's not just going to stay within Northern Arena being like, I don't know.
No, sponsors see that.
Yeah.
And
Like-
when I say it was a negative reaction, I mean, I use the word toxic for a reason.
There was vitriol. Like,
Yeah.
it was gross. Like, and it wasn't just like people of the community who had games. It was people of the community who just wanted to piss and moan about
Yes.
it, and who wanted to lash out at Black Lives Matter and, you know, continue making fun of George Floyd and whatever the hell else. And it really was the just horrific timing for the NHL esports thing. And obviously the event itself is horrific in and of itself. And I don't think we need to expand upon that any further, but it's just, it was like it was a tinderbox in the NHL community. We've known that there's this level of toxicity in it. When it's a smaller community, it feels like that's brought to the forefront. Hockey in general has a very toxic reputation and a toxic fan base, perhaps more so than other sports, again, because it seems to be a large enough portion to where it stands out more than other sports because it's not as worldwide or it's not as large. So it's, and I think that's, it's unfortunate that it happens because those people are always the loudest and that's how it goes. But there's not enough of the positive to fall back on when something like that happens because it's a small growing thing. And I don't think those people realize how much damage they do to the sport and to the esports scene when they did what they did.
Yeah. And I think just kind of to add on to that, if you don't mind, I think the biggest thing too with that you can't really forget to leave out is that not only did a lot of players have that backlash in the way that they did it, but a lot of them did it in a chat with officials that actually were running this tournament and are communicating with a lot of these sponsors. So they're seeing this and sponsors are seeing this. And I think it kind of goes to the point to where, like you guys mentioned, this community is so small as it is. It's not a League of Legends. It's not a Call of Duty. Even if you just kind of minimize that to sports, it's not a Madden community. It's not 2K. Hockey in general is a small community, and the gaming portion of that community cuts that to less than half. So the room for error is that much slimmer. And if as a community, the community doesn't take itself seriously, how can you expect people with money behind this, reputations and brands to protect, to take it seriously as well? And that specific event, just considering all of the context behind it, some of the things that were said, that felt like it really set back the potential of the community to grow further than what it has because of the context behind it and just what we are as a community, just because it is so small and the room for error is so much slimmer than it would be for a normal esports situation.
I think you guys pretty much nailed it, right? It's not that other communities don't have their toxic members. We already mentioned that. Everything does. The smaller the community, though, the more those voices are going to stand out. And the Northern Arena situation wasn't the start of the toxicity. This had been there. This had been festering.
It's just a magnifying glass.
Exactly. Let's be honest here. Now, none of us currently are affiliated with League Gaming in any way, but let's be honest here. Even dating back to when I took part in the league, NHL 13 or 14, and had a legitimate 13-year-old general manager, which is why I stopped playing. the chat box within LG has had its reputation as the most toxic, cringe 14-year-olds trying to be edgy, even though you know some of them aren't 14, they're 30 or fucking older. That had its reputation, earned its reputation years before the GWC was the thing, before the Northern Arena tournament was a thing. And I'm not going to sit here and say they had a responsibility to snuff it out, because I don't know if they would have been able to, because at the end of the day, it's very difficult to fully do that. But at the same time, I don't think enough was done within the community itself to self-police.
Yeah.
And by the time that self-policing was necessary, it wasn't already there, and people fucked up at the wrong time and fucked around at the wrong time, and it was incredibly costly.
On the topic of self-policing, I'm going to shout out the Super Smash Brothers community, who has done an excellent job of self-policing. Another one whose community has probably shrunk over the years in way of other esports, but it still has a huge, at least bigger than NHL. There's still a lot of following. But Super Smash, starting with the players all the way down to tournament runners at this point, are shutting out competitors and players and members of the community from participating in tournaments and anything else like that, who have shown to be racist, homophobic, transphobic, and other ways just hateful individuals. And I think that's absolutely huge. And that's what needs to be done. You have to snuff it out and just say, okay, you want to be like that, you don't get to play. And for NHL, like things like LG, I think they're caught in such a position. Number one, maybe they didn't do the right thing because they're afraid to lose the membership. They're afraid to be seen as quote unquote soft. This goes back to hockey culture in general.
Yep.
And they're caught in a no-win situation where you almost have to allow them, because it seems to be that's your baseline, that's your customer base, and that is just not a good look. And because it all comes back to the community being small, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, why is the community small? Well, hockey's not really that well known or that well liked. Okay, why is hockey not that well known or that well liked? Old ass bad mentalities and bad cultures that refuse to change with the times. And so you feel like you have to cater these individuals. And this goes all the way to the NHL. You feel like you have to cater to these individuals because you don't have enough of a base. And the reason you can't attract more base and more people is because you're having these people at the forefront, and they are like it or not, like who represent your sport at times. And it sucks, but
I think you could even go beyond just like things that people physically say, whether it's in a shot box or a DM. I mean, we've seen firsthand stories, especially on the NA side. I can't speak for the EU side because I don't play there, but we've seen firsthand stories of players getting doxxed and DDoSed and like things that genuinely go beyond just the game. Like we've seen people hit home personally to an extent. I mean, even going back to the story that's similar to the Northern Arena one, I remember during the Sharks tournament a few years ago, during the final, Olympia's goalie kept getting kicked out of his internet by someone else in the community. During a final that San Jose had their actual broadcasters, they're broadcasting. And it's just another example of how the community can't expect to be taken seriously if it doesn't take itself seriously. Like, yes, is it a bad look to see Anna Dua having to do a report on the NHL GWC in front of something that literally looks like Tougie setup right now? Yes. But is it also a horrible look to have professional broadcasters in a professional setup and we can't even start the games because someone thinks they're funny by DDoSing someone off of their internet to where we can't even start the series? Yes. Like, as much as it is a problem where things are from a game standpoint, from the investment that we're seeing from leagues or organizations, there's also a lot of self-searching I think the community has to do, to where it says, yes, these scenarios aren't great, but how can the community put itself in the best position to get opportunities? And I just don't know that we can look at the community right now and say that it's really done itself enough service or due diligence, I guess you could say, to say, yes, people should come in and invest in this. At least not right now.
I think Sin you nailed it a few minutes ago when you talked about the setup of not having enough people, so you cater to the wrong people. Of the hockey culture aspect being the outdated dude bro bullshit, but at the same time, what's the number one hockey podcast out there? Chicklets. And they personify that dude bro mentality. It's just interesting to look at in terms of that whole situation. And again, I want to reiterate, like, the Northern Arena toxicity that we're talking about here wasn't the first instance. Like, it was a symptom of a larger problem that is still ongoing.
The thing about that is that it surprised no one. And I think that's important to note, that it surprised no one, but we're pissed that it happened because you fucking idiots. You couldn't have chosen a worse time to be an absolute prick about things.
So in the aftermath of that, you know, we talk about the pandemic creating a bit of a bubble where organizations, NHL teams were looking at this as, oh shit, this is what it could be. And then when it's not immediately at its peak, they start getting cold feet, if not immediately kind of bow out of things. You talk about the toxicity as well. So it's not just, because like you mentioned, Sin, it's a numbers game. Like with LG, hey, we have the biggest user base. That's all people care about at the end of the day, right? When it comes to sponsors, orgs, whatever, it's all about the numbers. So LG was incentivized to not police as hard as they could have because it was beneficial to them. I don't necessarily blame them for that. That's just the way fucking business works in the culture that we have. It is what it is. But you look at all of this, the pandemic bubble, as I'll deem it, the toxicity of the community, and then you get to the video game itself. And you know, in talking about what the NHL series has been over the last however long, right now, if we're talking NHL 18, it'd be NHL 19. 2018 was the first year of the GWC. If we're talking NHL 19, it's not the end all be all, but the average Metacritic rating for NHL 19 is an 80. From a reviewer score, it's a 5.3 for a user score. You look at NHL 20, and you see where I'm going with this, I'm sure. NHL 20, critic score, 70. User score, 3.9. NHL 21, critic score, 72. User score, 2.4. NHL 22, critic score, 71. User score, 4.6. Bit of a bounce back year.
Yeah.
NHL 22.
I think that was defensive skill stick year, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Fuck yeah. That
NHL 23, critic score 71, user score 3.0. This year, critic score 71, user score 3.3 for NHL 24.
Better than I was expecting, considering what we've seen.
Yeah.
In
Yeah, I
fairness,
thought you were gonna say it
91
too.
reviews on that. So again, it's not the biggest sample size or anything like that. It's just going off of Metacritic. However, so you factor in all of this, the pandemic bubble, the toxicity, the effect that's having on what the viability of the scene is being viewed as, or how it's being viewed. And then you have the game itself, excuse me, taking a very, this fucking COVID cough, man, I can't shake it. Just out of nowhere, it'll just like catch and I fucking lose my breath, and it sucks for someone who's known for being long-winded. At the same time all of that's going on, you have at the very least a perceived dip in quality. Whether or not it's true or not, I think depends on the individual.
Optics are everything when it comes to a business. I mean, optics are everything.
So you have these organizations looking at the numbers not being what they thought they were going to be, looking at having to deal with the more toxic aspects of the culture, and then you have the game quality dipping all at the same time, to the point where you have some of the better competitors who are stepping away. Numbers aren't what they looked like they were going to be. Toxic community, skill level within the community falling. No shit. NHL 24 and the state of the esports scene for that game are in a reduced state compared to what people were hoping and thinking the community could be 6 years on from the first GWC.
Yeah.
It's a perfect storm. In terms of what it means moving forward, man, I don't know. Because, as Sin mentioned, you're caught in this cycle within the community itself. The video game itself is stuck in that cycle of who the hell do they focus on? Because it's very evident in terms of the development time that they have on a year-to-year title. They're just not going to be able to fully address the concerns and wants and desires of the competitive scene and the casual side at the same time. They're not going to take that approach of let's have this be an esports focused year, because that's not their directive. At least we can presume. The directive is to try and hit on all fronts, but you can't fully hit on all fronts because you don't have the fucking time. You don't have the resources. Like, no shit, the NHL team doesn't have the resources. Madden isn't accomplishing that goal of making everybody happy. And while I don't need exact numbers to know that Madden gets way more resources in terms of time, people, money. Same thing for FIFA or FC now at this point, where you know that community isn't fully happy either. So no shit, NHL's in the state that it's in, and it just leads you to the point where it's like, okay, how does the esports scene bounce back when you already have questions of how does the video game itself bounce back?
Yeah.
I think we've kind of seen where, even though the game might not be in a great state, can you remember at all, really from NHL 18 up to this point, to where the collective esports community was like, yep, this is a good game? I can't remember 1 year. I think that as a whole, the community, even though it's not going to necessarily love the game, they'll find it playable because they want to play competitively. It's just that for whatever reasons you may cite, NHL 24 specifically this year, players do not seem to want to play it. And I do think that maybe a lot of the wholesale changes to this year might have something to do with that. Some people love them, some people don't. This game plays drastically differently from any of the games from the past 10 years. But it's interesting because it just seems like, even though by year the games themselves may not be seen as great, they may not be seen as quality, and there's a lot of reasons to that, like you just mentioned, Tougie, but in the past, up until this year, it didn't seem to have that same correlation with how many people participated or how much investment esports had. Like, it's a very tricky thing, because it feels like this year, more than past years, the game is really taking a toll more on the high-end players, because you have guys like Entourage that just said, I don't want to play the game. I don't want to spend 9 months grinding the game. I'll retire and probably come back in a year or two. We didn't see it to the same extent, it feels like, a few years ago, even though we saw it a little bit. It feels like this year, on both ones and sixes, it's been a mass exodus more than the years prior.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of bring up the state of the game and the state of the community when it comes to gameplay. It's that the community, I think, needs to decide what it wants and be honest about what they want. because no matter what, it's the game's trash. So they went in a completely different direction, which should, create. I was hyped about it. I'm not gonna lie. I think implementation could have been much better, but I think a lot of the changes were really good. The pressure system being one of them, because from an outside viewership standpoint, if you're watching a Sixes game where the two teams are trapping and collapsing the whole game, that's not necessarily appealing to someone who's just trying to get into it. It might be appealing to someone familiar with the competitive scene, but I thought the pressure system would add a hell of a lot more excitement. And early on into the season, Tougie, when it had been tweaked enough to where I think it was in a really good spot, we had some exciting conclusions to periods, to games, exciting shifts. And the more it went on, the more they kept tuning it back to NHL 23, because that's essentially what they did. They tuned the pressure system to a point where it was a non-factor in competitive games, where people could just play the way they played in NHL 23. And then it went back to, I don't know what I'm going to get from this cast. These two teams, it could just be boring. And so I think the community, you clearly don't want a realistic hockey game, because the pressure system, despite what idiots were saying, is realistic. You get tired defending. The attacking team doesn't get as tired. They're able, and they're able to tire out the goalie and stuff like that. So, okay, you don't want that. You want more of an arcadey simulation, but then you also piss and moan about how it's not realistic. So at that point, EA has to kind of just throw up their hands. Like, we don't know. We tried something new. Everyone hated it. They don't have the luxury to tell that portion, fuck you, this is the direction we're going. Because, again, harkens back to the LG thing. This is your base. Like, it feels like this is your base, and you cannot afford, that level of, exodus, essentially. And yeah, it really sucks. And I think there's perhaps a big kind of gap between what a more casual person enjoys, like me. Like, I'm competitive, but I'm not a competitive player because I'm simply not good enough. I love the pressure system because it reminded me of what I like about hockey, is that you work hard, you forecheck, you force turnovers, you get rewarded. And it's not just a skill of you, it's a team-based thing. And I think the NHL in the community wants a situation where you can 1v5 or you can just dominate based on pure skill, and that's simply not always the case in hockey. But if you want that to be the case in esports, then be honest about that. Say you don't want a hockey simulation, you want a hockey arcade video game. And
because
we don't have that. Yeah.
It is an arcade style game. Like, if you want the ability to, like you said, 1v5 the other team and just have this crazy fucking highlight reel, or to be able to have it replicate, it's unlikely, but in Counter-Strike, big time tournaments, there are people who can survive a 1v3, a 1v4, or whatever the fuck, and be the hero. If that is what you want, then yeah, it's just funny because all of this, right? All of this wraps up into, like, Jesus Christ, what the hell is this game going to be? What the hell is the esports scene going to be? There's so many different aspects of it that are all wrapped up into one. Yeah. What does the NHL want at this point? What do they want the GWC to be? As it is, the NHL doesn't know what they want their own fucking league to be. We talk about that on a weekly basis here, Sin. The community doesn't know what the fuck they want. So how the hell would EA know what the hell to deliver? And even then, there's still an aspect of it's what EA wants, which what do they want? And how does that change based off of what they hear from the Game Changer Design Council, whatever the fuck, who act as conduits within the community that doesn't know what the fuck they want, between also taking feedback from casual game testers and stuff like that, because EA does that as well. It's not just No Sleeve said this, so this is what Ultimate Team is now. It's not how it works. We can suggest things. We have, I can only speak for me. Do I know for a fact if roster sharing would have been in the game had the community not pushed a franchise creator like me to say, keep pushing for roster sharing? I don't know. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But I'd like to think that people saying, hey, keep pushing for roster sharing actively helped. And maybe I'm foolish for that. I don't know. But that was an example of the community knowing what the hell they wanted. I feel like from an offline standpoint, it's a hell of a lot easier as opposed to gameplay, because you're never going to have agreeing opinions on gameplay, and it just creates this mess.
Another thing I wanted to bring up, and I think the GWC continues to be wrong for this, is to focus on 1v1. Hockey has always and will always be a team sport. If you want to draw people who are fans of the sport and not just fans of the video game, it has to be the team element. Watching sixes is always going to be better than watching a 1v1, because the goals, while there are some similar goals and there's higher quality chances, they come in a lot of different ways. Whereas in 1v1, it's all about exploiting the AI, exploiting the goalies, and exploiting it really is. And yeah, it's a video game. There's always going to be that. But sixes tones down on that because your opponent will not act in a predictable way like an AI does. And I think, and I've been screaming about this since 2018 and 2019, like GWC needs to have sixes. Sixes is the future of NHL Esports. And I understand 1v1 is probably easier and cheaper for sure. But six, if you actually want a long-term sustained success, then it has to be a team game. Because those are, it's a team sport, number one, and team-based esports are much bigger. Like League of Legends, Call of Duty. It's not just a 1v1 Call of Duty. It's not just 1v1 on Halo. The only way 1v1 would work is StarCraft, because it's an RTS. It's a completely different style. But yeah, I think that's the biggest mistake that was always going to plague NHL, is that they focus too much, at least the largest tournament focuses too much on 1v1, whereas sixes is a better way to market the competitive side of things. Because if you want to mirror hockey, that's the way to do it. And let's face it, that's what the esport is existing to do. That's what the game is existing to do in some way, to mirror hockey.
I feel like that's the number one complaint, too, that you see from people that don't really compete competitively, but watch things like the GWC casually. Like when you go to a post any other year, when they announce the GWC winner, they advertise that people that don't typically pay attention just are saying, oh, it's just the same person scoring the same 2 goals and abusing the computer. And, I get it. Logistically, it probably is a lot easier to do a 1v1 tournament. I know it's probably not cheap to fly out 2 to 4 teams. That's 12 to 24 people that you have to pay flights and hotels for. Mm-hmm. And I get all that. But at the same time, I think that just the overall product, people outside of our current community can invest in that more easier than they would be able to a 1v1, because it's just one person controlling one person and the rest are AI, compared to something like sixes, to where you have 6 different people to where all of them are going to have to be mentally locked in. Mistakes can be made from human error, and other humans are the ones that have to capitalize on them. It's not just continuing to have to, I know that the AI goalie doesn't make saves from this specific spot, or, if I hold the puck behind the net long enough, the AI defender is going to cheat and I can just go and give it across the net for a cross crease. Like, you don't have those same elements at 1v1 because things are so trained from AI. There's not that same mental battle that you see in sixes. And I think it's going to be easier for casual viewers that maybe are not like us or are not as invested to invest themselves in that and be entertained by that.
Yeah.
To your point about the 1v1 game, like, I don't know how impressed, for someone who knows the game, right? Like, for example, Sin and I, June of 2023, were in Helsinki. We covered the Sports Gamer Elite Sixes final and the 1v1 final. The Sixes final was entertaining in and of itself, but the 1v1 final was captivating because you had a player in Tempinen who he could see the zeros and ones in real time. Like, I have never seen somebody control and dictate the gameplay the way that he did in this 1v1 final. And it was just pure domination in both the semifinals and the outright finals.
He was getting 5+ goals a game. And
Right.
I was meaning to bring up Dempinen because it was, you and I were just awestruck by the sheer level that he was able to and it's not to take it away, but it is exploiting the system. Like the way he was scoring the goals, it's like he knows how goals are going to go in. He's practiced this. He's an extremely technical player. And that's who succeeds in those 1v1s against AIs, is the ones who understand how the game works down to like you said, the zeros and ones, like just understands the programming so much that he was just above and beyond anyone else. I've never seen that lopsided of a performance anywhere.
And in terms of the marketability side of things, what's better to market? The 6v6 side of things, or, oh, here's Tempinen who can control the game better than anybody else and has mastered the exploits and knows what movements are going to cause what reactions from poor AI and so on and so forth, right? Like, it's just, obviously from our perspective as people who have called, the majority of our games that we've called have been sixes. Mm-hmm. We all have experience calling the 1v1 side of things as well. It is that sixes aspect. It's the fact that, on each team you have 6 different personalities, the actions of 6 different people, really 12 different people in unison, are going to make a difference on the game. I mean, we could sit here and
the narratives are better too.
Yeah.
The stories are better. The histories are better. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about people changing teams, revenge matches, like there's so much more potential in sixes, but it's that short-sightedness of NHL and the esports scene in general, is that, well, this is the cheapest, makes the most money right now, and they're not looking at the big picture. They're not looking at what could be, they're looking at what is. And that is the biggest problem when it comes to the NHL and, by extension, the esports side of it.
The problem is, in terms of this whole conversation, right? We're not going to find the solution today.
Unfortunately not, no.
We're just not. Like, that's the real frustrating aspect of it. Is that at the end of the day, it would be so great to be like, okay, here's the solution. But as we've discussed, it's such a multi-layered issue that there is no, okay, this one quick fix and the whole thing is fine. All of it is dependent on all of the different factors that we've talked about at this stage. And, it sucks, right? It sucks. Like, when Sin and I started at Sports Gamer 4 or 5 years ago.
Longer, yeah, because April of 2019 is when Sin and I were already friends at that point for a year or so, and we had been talking about wanting to get into esports commentary, and it's like, well, do we hit up LG? Hold on.
Do we hit up...
I know exactly when we started because I have the DM, but continue.
There you go. It's like, do we go the LG route? Do we go the Sports Gamer route? And in April of 2019, that was the first time that I got invited out to Vancouver, and Kenu, who is behind Sports Gamer, was also there. I planned on talking to him anyway. Coincidentally, we ended up on the same floor of the hotel that EA put us up in. So we spent just so much time kind of talking about things. And while Brody, who's one of the main heads behind LG, was also there, we had our conversation, and that's fine. We didn't get that same level of talking point, and it was that time with Ken where I'm just like, okay, I think this is the direction that we go, which I still think was probably the best decision for Sin and I, because otherwise we would have ended up in a head-to-head situation with no sleeves and Grizz, with no guarantees of who would have been the ones in those spots. And admittedly, there have been times where I'm like, would have been cool to have that experience. But at the same time, I'm happy for both, Sleeves and Grizz to have gotten the experiences that they have earned and deserve. And I'm happy that those have been there for them. And I'm very fortunate. I put it this way, Sin's certainly not going to say, no, we should have gone the other direction, because, Jesus Christ, here we are 5 years later, and you're on the verge of potentially moving to Finland. You have
And
a significant other
married
over there at this
and
point.
starting
Like,
a family. Yeah, like I'm
like
gonna be.
I get to take, my now wife over there as a result of this. Like, we're perfectly fine. Like,
Yeah.
we can joke like, yeah, we don't exactly regret missing out on an NHL shop experience over the weekend. But there are other really, really cool things that the likes of Sleeves and Grizz have gotten to do. So from that aspect, it's worked out well across the board. It's just that kind of thought of like, you just don't want those experiences to go away.
Yeah.
And I can't speak for Sleeves and Grizz at this point in terms of what their thoughts are on like, oh shit, what's the future of this? I would imagine they feel similar in some regards in terms of like they can see what the situations are right now and want it to be better. And that's, I think, what we all want is for it to be better.
Yeah.
Sin, you found that text, though.
I did. I started talking to Kenu in September of 2018 when he put out a tweet looking for casters for Sports Game over here in contact. You and I didn't start casting it until 2019, though.
Okay.
So,
which was after that Vancouver trip. So
yes. So yeah, it was, and that's how I found out you had also talked to him, because it was after the Vancouver trip, and then you were like, "Yeah, I'm gonna be casting for Sports Game." I'm like, "Oh my god, me too. We're casting together." And yeah, so it was 2019. But yeah, at this point, it is now March. I think our first ones were around the springtime.
Yeah,
and we had casted both. I think we'd actually just started with NA and then transitioned to EU later. I think our first casting job was NA, but yeah, it was 2019. So at this point, it has now officially been 5 years, which is nuts.
And it's crazy because it's one of those things.
That's half a decade. Fuck.
Yeah. Like it's one of those things for me, right? Where it's like, I've talked to you about this. I've talked to my wife about this and everything, and other friends, where it's like, from my perspective on like the content creation front with Twitch and YouTube, man, if it ends tomorrow, I don't regret the time investment at all. Like, there's been some great opportunities out of this. I've made some great friends out of this and everything like that. And it's like, just the fact it's like, okay, based off of where I could have been versus what I'm doing here, like, yeah, no, I'll choose being able to sit here and shoot the shit with people like you guys for an hour over whatever the hell it could have been. So it's still worth it, but at the same time, it's one of those things where, number one, you still don't want it to end, and you can still, especially from the esports side of things, you can still see the potential of where this could go. And for me, it's not even a matter of like, I want to make sure it's me. It'd be nice if it was me. It'd be nice if it was Sin. It'd be nice if it was Major. Like we talked about this, like that world final in February 2023, the only, the two key people that were missing were Brandon and our buddy Nick, F5 Penguin, in terms of the people where it's like, shit, it's like the group almost doesn't feel complete at that stage. And it's one of those things where it's like, shit, now in the future, we want that type of event to happen again, and for everybody to be able to be involved in that. And obviously, when you're talking about uncertainty from the NHL's own production, there are uncertainties with an LG. There are uncertainties with the Sports Gamer, with a Sharks Gaming, a Ducks Gaming, Isles, Caps. Like, there's going to be that uncertainty because, again, the path doesn't look as clear as it once did. And it's just, it's tough when you can see the potential of things and the hard work that's been put into things. And I know the three of us especially will stand by the work that we've done with Sports Gamer, and we'll put it up against anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think particularly the final that we just put on for Sports Gamer last month, where you had Sin and I on commentary. Major did a lot of the interviews to spice things up and just add to that production even further.
Nick still VO'd the hype videos.
Mm-hmm.
Like, genuinely, it's like, here comes the self, congratulatory pats on the back here, but it's like the work that we put out, it's just, you hope that it leads to furthering the scene. And that was the point of, Sports Gamers fucking swinging for the fences shot of that World Final, which our buddy Justin Crease Police put out a tweet around the time the whole GWC thing was being discussed, essentially saying like the standard with images from the World Final. And yeah, like the fact that you still have an independent source being the ones to essentially push to set the standard, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
You hear the three letters NHL and you expect a certain quality. And when they're not putting that on, how do other people put that on? It's a tough call. But gentlemen, is there anything else in regards to this? Because again, as I've mentioned, it's such a multi-layered topic.
Yeah, we can go
anything
round
else
and
that
round.
comes to mind?
I don't think that this is, I will say, like, I don't think that, just to be clear, I don't think this is like this is the end of NHL Esports, it's never going to go. I don't think it's that. I mean, I do think that it's at a rough patch, 100%. No one can even come close to denying it, but I do think that at the bare minimum, I mean, let's just use that final a month ago as example. I mean, the level of quality and production, everything behind that, it's important to remember for those that don't know, that entire thing was done remotely. That was not in a LAN. That wasn't in anything like that. Some of the better productions we've seen have been done remotely. So in terms of being able to put on good tournaments and being able to get events that are high quality and that players and sponsors and organizations want to invest in, is still plenty there. I think it's just a matter of, on all 4 or 5 pillars that are causing this problem, whether it be game, leagues, orgs, communities, doing that soul searching and saying, okay, what needs to be done and how do we go about fixing it? And then actually putting in that action to fix it. Because I still think that this community in NHL Esports as a whole still does have that potential to be something great. Will it fill out a 20,000 seat arena by any stretch? No, probably not. It probably won't ever do that. But at the same time, I still think that we can at the very least get back to where we were a few years ago, to where we were like, okay, this actually has legitimacy and a future towards it beyond just now.
Yeah, I mean, World Finals, like we had in that assembly arena at the height of the people sitting in those chairs, that was 150 to 200 people. Yeah. Like, and that's pretty good when there's other games going on at the same time in a country with a population of 6 million. Like, just imagine if, we're able to get that little bit more, we just take it in baby steps, and we were maybe gifted something a little bit too big at the wrong time during the pandemic, where the viewership numbers on Twitch were huge. And then, that people started to kind of expect that, but it's still a growing thing. So it's the perception of, are we in a rough patch, or did we just have a peak when we weren't quite ready for it? And I think that's an interesting thing to consider as well.
I think that's a fair way to label it, is that the scene tried to grow too fast. And now we're seeing like, oh shit, this ceiling is a lot shorter at the moment than we thought it was, and we don't quite have the boost to break through it. I think the fear, though, is that, again, like, people know that the potential is there. The only question is whether or not the important factors that can really make a difference and propel this to where it needs to be. I think the fear is, like, have those factors been permanently scared away? And you obviously have to hope that that isn't the case. But with how small the scene is to begin with, I think it is a factor, right? Of just like, oh shit. Like, I
think maybe some companies and some things, but as going back to B Mage's point of everyone needs a soul search, community needs to decide. It's like, if they want this to work, then show that you've matured and grown as competitors and as people. And then you will be able to attract back some new ones. Some are gone forever, but there's others who I'm sure want that opportunity to dip their feet back in. I mean, Northern Arena is a Canadian-based thing. Hockey's still the biggest thing in Canada. You can get back some people, but take it as a learning experience. Yeah, for sure.